This is Fox 5 News Morning.
7:30 right now, with just 3 weeks to go until the election, tonight being the final presidential debate. The question is, have you made up your mind as to whom you are voting for? If you're still undecided or just entirely fed up with it all and thinking about not voting, you might want to consider this. Staying home on November 8th could actually help sway the results. How so? What happens if people really don't vote this year? And how important are those all so important, as we say, swing states? Let's find out. Joining us now via Skype, Cliff Young, President of Public Affairs for Ipsos, U.S. global market research firm with a focus on opinion polls and data collection. Cliff, good morning. Good to talk to you again.
It's great to be here.
I want to start with what happens if people do not go to the polls. Now, I know on your website you're showing pretty good turnout, but what happens if people don't show up? Does that benefit one particular candidate?
That's a great question, and that's actually the dirty little secret of polling, both here in the United States and globally. It's about who shows up on Election Day and whether pollsters get it right. And so what do we know based on the data today? If it's a high turnout election, if we're at historic averages or better than that, about 60% of eligible voters or more, that's really Hillary Clinton territory, and the Democrats do really well. If we dip below that and we get into sort of lower turnout levels around 50, 55, that is Donald Trump territory, and Republicans will take it. So the results really depend on if people show up or don't show up on Election Day.
So if they don't show up, it benefits Donald Trump. If they do show up, it benefits Hillary Clinton, in a nutshell.
Yes, to be very clear, if a lot of people show up, it benefits Hillary Clinton. If people don't show up at historic rates, it helps Donald Trump.
Let me ask you this, though, Cliff. When you're looking at things now, the way that your research is showing at this point, as of today, a little less than 3 weeks out from Election Day, we were just throwing the idea around, either we're going to see record numbers of turnout or we're going to see record high numbers of turnout or record low numbers of turnout. What kind of feel are you getting?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question to answer this electoral cycle. To be quite frank, we don't know. We're at historic levels of undecideds. We're almost double the rate of 2012. And we don't know what undecideds do all the time. Sometimes they make their minds up when they're in the polling booth. Many times they don't show up on Election Day. We believe that we'll be at the historic average, around 60%. Once again, that's a good number for Hillary Clinton. But to be quite frank, we don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty around that.
Let me ask you something that you do know a little bit more about, because I know that you do track your own polls over the years and you track people's polls over the years. Look, the candidates will say, okay, if the candidate's up, they'll say polls are valuable. If the candidate's down, they say don't trust the polls. Let's wait until Election Day. As we get closer and closer to the election, do you start to see polls becoming more accurate as we get closer to that Election Day?
Yeah, that's basically the logic. The farther out you are from Election Day, the less you should trust them, actually, the less robust they are. But when we're getting into 3 weeks before Election Day, 2 weeks in a week, they become very, very accurate. They're typically, there's a historic average of about 2 points. That's a really good place to be. So a week out, there's about a 2-point average error. That's a great place. That's when you maybe, if you want to bet the farm, you need to bet the farm. Probably a week out, you're probably in a good place.
All right, and I want to ask you as well, because as we are now within that 3-week margin before we get to Election Day, what are you seeing now as far as what each candidate has to do to win? And let's just assume in this case that we have a pretty decent turnout at the polls. Donald Trump right now behind in most, if not all, polls. So what does Donald Trump have to do? Who has to turn out for him to win?
Oh, that's a great point. And he has to do two things, actually. First and foremost, he has to energize his base. He has a problem with the base right now, the Republican base. He has to energize and convince independents. Part of that's going to be done about talking about the issues, but the other part is actually doing what he's doing right now. Talking about a rigged system. Actually, a supermajority of the base believes that, and there's a reason why he's talking about that issue specifically. There's a reason for that narrative.
And finally, Cliff, are there any particular, we talk about swing states all the time, any particular states that Donald Trump has to win in order to get, if we're talking the electoral votes here, that are needed to actually win the election? What states in particular really would make a big difference for Donald Trump?
Yeah, for him to even be competitive, he needs Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina. Before the first debate, he had them. He was doing well in those states. They've ticked over towards Hillary over the last few weeks, but he needs those 3 states to be competitive. And then it's kind of a coin flip. If he takes Pennsylvania maybe on the one hand, or some sort of combination of Colorado, Wisconsin, or Michigan, that gets him there. But he really needs those first 3 states, Florida, Ohio, and North Carolina.
All right, getting a little look behind the scenes at how the polling works. Cliff Young, President of Public Affairs for Ipsos USA. Thanks, Cliff. Good to talk to you again.
It was great being on.
All right, 7:35 right now.